Afternoon, miss.
Is this an official volunteers checkpoint?
It is. Papers, man. We have a serious problem.
There's no way that this can get any worse.
They're branding people now.
Neck check.
Need another minute?
Am I sensing a little attitude, miss?
Someone will do something.
You can't save everybody.
I can try.
This is a group of concerned citizens who agree more stringent measures must be taken.
People might attack you if you're holding
𝗍𝗶𝗁 hand.
They're growing, they're more organized, and we need to move right now.
Get on your knees, bend to pray. Look at me. You can change.
These are organized hunters with assault rifles out for blood.
Yeah.
Mothers, brothers, sisters, fathers, believers, pretenders, bona fide sinners, racists, fascists, nihilists, bigots, prophets, saints, and angels, and ladies, and all these gentlemen.
You want to get out of this country?
Everybody walking this land.
Hey everyone, welcome to Keto and Crime. Today I have got a review of the 2021 movie American Insurrection. American Insurrection is an indie action film written by William Sullivan and Jarrett Kerr. It briefly appeared in theaters beginning in October of 2020 and then moved over to digital and DVD release shortly thereafter. What is this movie? Well, basically, it is a political fantasy movie. It has some interesting points, but it is definitely out there. Think of Handmaid's Tale without all of the setup. So basically, we dive in on a handful of characters. We have 𝗍𝗶𝗁, David, RJ, Sarah, Jarrett, who are a group of quote-unquote insurrectionists that are looking for a way to make it out of the United States into Canada, i.e. going back to Handmaid's Tale. Evidently, America in the last 5 or 6 years has been taken over by an extreme right-wing political figure known as the Founder. We find this out in flashbacks, and he has militarized a militia based obviously on the Proud Boys and other militia-style groups that he was put in power by them. They have taken over the military, and he employs these people as a national police force and has transformed America into a surveillance state where anyone that is not heterosexual, Christian, white, has to register their beliefs with the government, and they are tattooed with a barcode on their neck where all their information is stored. So think of it as, Chinese surveillance comes to America. He has made a deal with these volunteers that their residences are no surveillance zones. He trusts them enough that they are no surveillance zones, and that sets the heart of this movie. Now, we don't know how the insurrection happened. We're not shown that. It just happened. We're shown a few interviews with this right-wing political leader in but really nothing substantial as to how this happened. We'll get into how a militia force could actually, subvert the United States military later, but we're just shown. And so all the action takes place at the farm of Gabe, who is a volunteer that has been basically taken hostage by these 5 persons and is being held in his barn. Now, the only actor of note in this movie is the actor that plays Gabe, Michael Raymond James. He is well known for playing the part of Renee in season 1 of True Blood, and he is actually, in my opinion, the only likable character in this whole movie. But we'll get into that. So basically, we have Sarah, who is a member of a group that is trying to smuggle people that are not wanted in the United States over to Canada, and they're waiting right at the Canadian border. Gabe's cabin is evidently somewhere in New England, right at the Canadian border with Ontario, or maybe even Quebec. So they're trying to get across, but they are waiting there with a radio, shortwave radio, that will tell them the coordinates where it is safe to cross, because evidently this militia group has the border blocked. Now, let's talk about why. Why, if this is a white supremacist takeover of the United States, if they don't want people that are not like them, why would they not let people go into Canada if Canada is willing to take them? Again, if you go back and look at history, anytime that some of this thing has happened, you would have to go back as far as the Nazis. The Nazis, for a long time, started deporting people that they didn't want in their country anywhere that would take them. So I don't understand why this militia group wants to keep people that they don't want in the United States, and then I guess according to some of the scenes in the book, or in the movie, they like to use them as targets. But anyway, so they are waiting there for these coordinates. In the meantime, 𝗬𝗏, who is the second most likable character, is a young Muslim woman that refuses not to wear her hijab, and I support her on that 100%. She is married to David, who is a closeted homosexual who is, drinking himself into oblivion, and later has an affair with RJ, who is a young gay man that joins their group. She is trying to get to know Gabe, what caused him to join up with these militiants, and what caused him to believe the way he does. And as I said, he turns out to be one of the most likable people in the whole movie, because he just lays it on straight. And also, Michael Raymond James is an excellent actor. In the midst of it, you see a whole lot of turmoil between 𝗬𝗏 and David, because their marriage is falling apart. You see the affair between David and RJ, and then you see the other couple, Sarah and Jarrett, who are also having their own turmoil, because Sarah refuses to leave the radio and just go across the border, create a new plan to go across the border. In the meantime, you see flashbacks, how all the relationships came to be, why some of them chose to self-report as not agreeing with this new regime, while others, like David, refused to self-report. So there's a lot of conflict there. And then eventually you get to the point where 𝗬𝗏 has made friends with Gabe, and he has promised to take them across the border at a safe spot. And from there, tempers flare, and things just kind of spiral off out of control. Now, if you look at the trailer, it looks like a very exciting movie, and I think the premise of it was very good. I would have liked to have seen how we got here. I mean, there's a few flashback clips, but nothing really substantial. I would like to have seen, just like in the Handmaid's Tale, how we got here. That would have been very exciting to me. And even though I think, together with the Handmaid's Tale, this is kind of a very left-leaning political fear fantasy. And I would say the same about a similar movie where right-wingers, say that the left has taken over the country, and in the same regard, I would say this is a political fantasy no matter what side you're on. I would like to have seen how we got here. Also, some of it just doesn't make sense. Why won't they just let these people go? Going back to the most right-wing extremist of all, the Nazis, sending people, deporting people willy-nilly to get them out of the country. The acting is varied. I think Michael Raymond James, does an excellent job portraying him. After that, Nadine Malouf, who plays 𝗬𝗏, does a great job. And then the others kind of go downhill from there. They're not believable. It's kind of forced. So anyway, that is the overall premise of American Insurrection. And if you want to hear my 100% review, stay tuned as I discuss it with my good buddies, Brian from the Front Porch Conservative, and Brentley from Dangerous Rhetoric. Let's dive in. And welcome to Keto and Crime. As promised, I have my good buddies here, Brian from the Front Porch Conservative and Brentley from Dangerous Rhetoric, and we're going to talk about the movie American Insurrection. But first, we'd like to everybody introduce themselves. We'll start with Brian, and go ahead and tell everybody where they can find you.
Good evening, folks. My name is Brian Trippett. I am the Front Porch Conservative. I've got a channel on YouTube and on Rumble, and I'm on Twitter. I usually post videos about 3 or 4 times a week. I try to do a live interview on Thursday, which I do have a live interview coming up tomorrow, as a matter of fact. It is with the pollster Rich Barris from Big Data Poll. That's going to be a very cool interview. So if you get a chance, tune in tomorrow. I also do a live stream on the weekends called Front Porch Brunch, and Miss Tracy was gracious enough to invite me here to give some thoughts about this movie that we're going to talk about. And this character over on the right, Mr. Brentley, is the very first person, along with Mr. Daniel, that I interviewed for chatting on the porch. And just glad to be here. Looking forward to doing this, and I'll hand it over to my partner in crime over there.
Hi, everybody. I'm Brentley from Dangerous Rhetoric. It's a small podcast. We have YouTube, Rumble, and Spotify. Places you can find it. And you can find links to my Twitter, probably on Instagram, on the YouTube page. There's links to everything. You can also go to dangerousrhetoric.com to see all of our past stuff. So very excited to talk about this movie. Thought it was a very interesting film. Yeah, let's get into it.
All right. Well, let's and by the way, if you really want good political analysis, I really enjoy Brian's channel. He does it from a very real researched position, and if you like everything politics and pop culture, Brentley's podcast is one of the best. So definitely check those out. And with that being said, let's dive into this. American Insurrection, not to be confused with the PBS documentary, American Insurrection. There are 2 of them, although the PBS documentary is really good too. But this was released in October of 2021, had a very limited theater run, and then it went to digital. I could not find any information on how much money the movie made, but I did find, but they did make it for 12 million or less. Those are the estimates. And it's basically a political fantasy movie. It's not really post-apocalyptic, but it's definitely a slanted political melodrama action film. And even though it has its low points for me, it was actually not that bad, in my opinion. It could have been a lot worse. It's basically picks up in modern day United States, where a militia group known as the Volunteers have taken over and become a national police force. They are prosecuting and persecuting anyone that is non-white, straight, Christian. So basically, it's the patriarchy. And you have to self-report or be reported on by somebody else, and you report yourself to the government as not being a member of what I just listed, white, straight, and Christian, and they put a barcode tattoo on your neck, which has all your information stored digitally, and you're pretty much terrorized by the Volunteers. That's your life. And the Volunteers' homes are considered it's a surveillance state. The homes of these Volunteers are considered no surveillance areas. So that's where we get the premise for this movie. And this group of 5 non-white straight Christian people is trying to get out of the United States over the border into Canada. They have taken over the farm of a volunteer by the name of Gabe, and they are holding him hostage. And they're waiting for a shortwave radio coordinates to tell them where to cross into Canada. And that's where the movie kicks off. And my first inclination was, if this volunteer group hates non-straight white Christian people so badly, why would they try to stop them from going into Canada if Canada will take them?
Good question. It's a very good question. The other thing I noticed real early on was that the production company listed was called Drama Queen. And I was like, that fits. that totally fits. And then also very early, as we were mentioning before you started recording, was that there was a little sex scene, pretty very like the first scene almost. We're seeing like this couple like getting it on, and my initial inclination when I see that in the beginning of a movie like this, and honestly, I feel like the movie is at its core a horror film. It's the group of people versus the environment. The environment is the monster, and it's personified by the volunteers and how they sort of just like, they're always they're out there. They could just pop up and get you at any moment. You never know what's gonna happen. The one thing I thought is they did a really good job building suspense.
Yeah.
In the early part of the movie, there was like a scene where the volunteers are coming to the house, and it's like and like that part, my heart was pumping. Like I was like,
yeah,
shit, they're coming.
Yeah.
And I thought that was very good filmmaking.
I did too for the limited, and then they very eloquently put out their plan. Like the 5 people behind me, like Jarrett is the guy with the beard. They pretty much tag him as being the one that looks most like a volunteer. So they have him pretend to be Gabe, and everybody else hides in the basement.
Or he pretends to be the volunteer, not pretend to be gay. He pretends to be
the
volunteer.
Yeah, you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And it turns out that the guy that plays Jarrett is 𝗟𝗏, one of the producers and the writers. And I thought it's really funny they didn't even bother to change his name. I mean, come on. You couldn't have changed it to Jim or Bob or anything but your own name.
Could have named him Sue for all we know. I mean, that might have been enough for him to step up, just to throw a little.
That's also one of the faux pas of writing is you're not supposed to, as a writer, you're not supposed to like put yourself into your stories. Like that's one of the things that Stephen King warns about in his book on writing. And he broke that rule in his magnum opus, the Gunslinger. He put himself in the story. But he also advises against it. So for what that's worth. But I thought
really think that the Gunslinger is his magnum opus?
Well, it's his big book series, right? It's a 7, 9. I don't even know how many books are in it because it's like if you count the ones that came after. But I really liked it until the ending. Like the ending, I was just like, really, King? And that's the other thing that King emphasizes in his book on writing is that the ending of a story is the opportunity to really wrap things up, to present to your audience your thesis, your message, the whole reason that you made the film. The ending is where you hit that. And that was another thing I sort of thought about this film was that the ending, by the time it came, I was just like so relieved that the movie was over. Because I felt like it went on a little long. And they sort of dragged stuff out. They could have cut a lot out. It ended up being close to 2 hours, I think, in terms of running time. Could have easily been, somewhere between 80 and 90 minutes, I feel.
Exactly.
Because I feel like they hit a lot of the same points multiple times. And that was sort of unnecessary and just sort of like dragged the film a little bit. But in very early, also, there was like, and this is the thing they show in the trailer. If you watch the trailer for the film, they show this the girl who's sort of like the protagonist. She's the one behind Tracy, sort of guiding.
Table duck.
Yeah, she's sort of like, so her thing is that she's delivered people across the border multiple times. She's done it several times. She's sort of their Sherpa, their guide, and she's going to be taking them across, but they're waiting for this like radio signal to come over the radio.
Yeah.
And as time goes on and things get more and more crazy, basically the group starts to doubt whether the signal is ever going to come. And that plus as the circumstances change, I don't want to spoil things, but it basically adds urgency to the situation. And, it's also like, are they going to turn on each other? Like, what's happening here? Like, the movie does do a good job at keeping you guessing. The whole time I didn't know what was going to happen next. Like, the movie wasn't super predictable. And I didn't realize it was a horror film really until like an hour into it. I was like, oh, okay, I see what they're doing here.
It definitely has elements of horror. Brian, what was your first impressions of the film?
Well, like you guys, I mean, would I rate this in my top 5 films that I want to watch if I've got a weekend and like 3 extra hours? Probably not. That said, I still think it's a good film in spite of what I think are some problems. The pluses to me are, for one, each actor I thought did a wonderful job with the part they had. To be perfectly honest, I mean, they're not going to win Academy Awards for this stuff, but I mean, honestly, as far as like making their character and what they're feeling and what they're trying to do believable and relatable to the audience, I thought they were fantastic on that ground. Two, I'm like you, Tracy, because we were talking about this backstage, that I thought the cinematography was amazing. Where they shot this film, I'm guessing Western New York, Vermont, somewhere in there, maybe near the Canadian border. It's beautiful country. I also thought that the director did a wonderful job tying a lot of symbolism in to each character's function. I mean, for example, Sarah has this just absolute maniacally focused devotion to the radio. That radio is her whole purpose in life, and she is not going to let anything come between her getting those coordinates and getting her friends out of the situation that they're in. On the negatives, I think the film has a lot of the problems that a lot of movies for the past 5 to 10 years have been plagued with. You have intersectional feminism. You have, men being made to look weak, and the women being, totally the bestest ever. For example, I mean, Sarah is the absolute leader of the group, and I'm sitting here thinking to myself, okay, I have no problem with you being strong, but why do you have to be a bitch?
Yeah.
Okay? Let's be perfectly honest. This is not the first person that goes on your A list for invites to the cocktail party. Okay. No, this chick, just God love you, honey. Take a pill, sit down, you chill. I did think that 𝗬𝗏, I thought was one of the best characters of the whole film, to be perfectly honest.
Very, very likable.
But again, she's so vacillating back and forth between different themes. It's like, what is she really? What is the overall arc of her character? That was one thing I thought was a little disappointing. In the end, we're talking about who's your favorite character of the film. For me, it was 𝗬𝗏, it was Gabe, or the dog as they called him, and RJ, but the rest of them, I wouldn't give you plug nickel for him, to be perfectly honest. I mean, David's just got all kinds of problems. He's all over the place.
Yeah.
And then you got the other guy, and help me here,
Jarrett.
Yeah, Jarrett. He's got issues, and which is like trying to be strong, protective for Sarah, and also like following her lead because he doesn't know what the hell he's doing, and she's in charge. So it's like, it's like I felt that's like, why do we need to inject this? I mean, I agree with Brent. This is a horror film. To me, I took it more from the perspective of, dystopian future and its political angles. The other thing that I thought was very weak about this film, and I think we've all kind of touched on, is how did this group, the volunteers, come to have so much power? I mean, did civilian government fall apart? I mean, there's not been a war apparently because society is still functioning at some level. But
you know what I like about the only hint that we get of the backstory about why things sort of like fell apart or whatever. There's like one scene in like the flashbacks. So they have these flashbacks where they're showing the before time, and the four of them, 𝗬𝗏 and David are together. They're like dating or married or something. They're romantically entangled, and Sarah and Jarrett are together. They're also romantically entangled. And in the flashbacks, we also learn, like, spoiler alert, I guess, that Jarrett and Sarah lost their son. And it's not explained. We have no idea how. It's just, he's gone. And, it has something to do with the Troubles. And there's this one scene where the four of them are in like a house together, and they're just like, all of a sudden their phones like make these beeping noises, and they all look down and they're all just like, like all like horrified at their phones, but like they don't actually, tell us why.
It
They're
was like
horrified.
some bizarre Amber Alert, like a white supremacist Amber Alert. It's just like, and then when it flashes back to them, you see Sarah with long, beautiful hair, and then all of a
Which was
sudden
a wig, I think.
yeah, of course. And then she lost her baby, and then all of a sudden her head is shaved. So I think, just like Brian said, that shows that she is spiraled into some sort of mental illness. It has to do, maybe the radio was a symbol for her son or the baby they lost.
Yeah,
And
they did make that comparison at one point. They showed her like cradling the radio, and then flashback to her like cradling the kid.
Yeah. And then we also find out through those flashbacks that 𝗬𝗏 was is a Muslim woman that refused not to wear her hijab, and I salute her for that. Girl, do what you want to do. It's religious freedom. And then it shows how these volunteers blew up her mosque and killed all of her entire family. So she has been very damaged too, but yet she is, to me, one of the most real characters, because she is the only one trying to get to know Gabe, who they've locked and chained up in his barn, as to why he became a volunteer, why he believes the way he does, and then she tries to explain to him why she believes the way she does. And in the courses of those conversations, just like we have said many, many times when we've been together on some kind of broadcast, they find out that they're not so very different. They're a lot more alike than they are different. And then they talk about how they were divided. And I think that's very, very symbolic for today.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, it seems almost like the film was an excuse to have the conversation that 𝗬𝗏 and Gabe were having.
Yeah.
Because I feel like a lot of it is the writers and directors sort of directly speaking to the audience, or like people they perceive to be on the other side of the political equation, and they're trying to humanize those people, but at the same time be like, but like, what if you're wrong? Like there's one part where 𝗬𝗏's like asking her, he's like sort of probing his ideology, and she plants that seed, like, what if, like, what if you're wrong about this?
But he never bows down to her. He always says, stop attacking my culture. We were told to celebrate your culture, or this culture that wasn't my culture, but what's wrong with my culture? And that's what it all was. I wasn't trying to force you to live my culture, but you were trying to force me to live yours. And so it kind of boils down to that.
I thought there was also an interesting point where they were having an interaction where at one point 𝗬𝗏's like probing Gabe, and he just gets fed up, and he's like, I don't want to have this conversation, and like, kicks the food or whatever. And she's like, that's the problem. You don't want to have this conversation. And I was just like, that's reversed. Like, those of us on the center right, and even people on the right are very willing to talk to anybody who wants to have a conversation.
Absolutely.
Exactly. But just like us, we never find out Gabe has personal pain too. We never find out, he was married with kids. They're no longer around. Why? Just like 𝗬𝗏, he has.
No, they gave that part. She said that the wife left with the kids because when he came back from the war, he was a veteran, and when he came back, he had like PTSD, and he was not livable. Like she couldn't deal with him. Basically, I think is what he said.
Yep. So there you go. My bad. I watched it twice and somehow totally missed that part.
Yeah. The other couple of things that kind of stuck out to me is that conversation arc between 𝗬𝗏 and Gabe, just kind of like is the whole film. It's like, the Gabe is supposed to be made to understand why 𝗬𝗏 is the way she is, what her culture is, etc. And it's like the film is like, yeah, look at what happens when these right wingers take over, but the directors and the writers never ask the obvious question. Well, how do you guys know that the other side doesn't feel the exact same way about you? I mean, you're making this film from the perspective of, oh my gosh, the poor, repressed Islamist, or the individual who's gay, or, whatever. But you never ask the question, well, wait a minute, there's a whole bunch of people on the other side who feel just as repressed, who feel just as put upon, who feel just as everything else, but you never explore it from their side. But you always you got to come out from the angle of, oh, we're the ones who are being repressed. We're the ones who are being put upon. We're the ones who are being persecuted. I mean, there's one great line in there. Yeah, now we've got hunters with assault rifles, and I'm thinking, oh God, can you be any more obvious? Really?
Well,
It's
see,
like,
if all the libs, if all the leftists in the country when this happened had executed their right to bear arms, this might not have happened. So you pissed on your own dream there, leftists. Guns might have prevented that.
well, with some leftists, I'm just worried about knowing which way to point the end of the gun. It's like, it's like, do you really
Also,
want some of these people exercising their Second Amendment right? Really?
like, there's one point where like the founder of the volunteers is like on TV and he's giving like an interview with like a TV personality lady who's like sort of like interrogating a little bit, being like, oh well, most of like 89% of your membership is like white male, blah blah blah, and he starts in at one point, like, he just gets so flustered that he like, is like, oh, you know what, I think this interview's over. And I was just like, did they do that intentionally to sort of like mock like conservatives who have walked out famously on interviews? I know Trump walked out on one interview. I believe Elon, I think, walked out on an interview. And I'm like, are they trying to paint people like who walk out of disingenuous media interviews with like corporate press as the leader of a white supremacist militia? Like it just smacked a little too heavy on the nose, and I was just like, yeah.
I agree. Like, what was it? The NBC town hall they had with Trump, like back during the election, was, I think it was Savannah Guthrie was the MC. She was so like irritatingly flippant. I'm a very calm person, but if that had been me up there and she was talking to, I'd have probably decked the bitch on live TV. I mean, you can get pushed to a certain point, but so that, like you said, there's the other side of that. Why can't these reporters just ask genuine, honest questions and not be snarky about it and not be argumentative about it? I'm not saying don't push the envelope and don't play devil's advocate, but there's there's an art to interviewing somebody, and most of these talking heads on mainstream media just don't have the gift at all.
But it's the difference. It's the difference between being tough, knowing how to be tough, and the perception that you want people to think that you're tough. And for some people in journalism, their idea is, I want people to think I'm tough, therefore I gotta get up somebody's grill and I gotta, as opposed to, the calm demeanor. Mr. President, why is it that you're choosing to send $20 billion to Ukraine when people in Hawaii have just suffered the most horrendous disaster of our lifetimes? Do you not care about your fellow countrymen? I said that in a completely calm voice. I didn't raise my voice. It got the question across with firmness, and it would put any politician on the spot. Journalists
and Biden said no comment.
Yeah. Along with "Go to hell, you bastard," which is your right to do under free speech. But journalists today think they have to, like that one CNN town hall, Caitlin Collins. Oh my gosh, she's getting in Trump's grill. She's like, "Are you going to answer the question? Are you going to answer the question? You want to let me talk?" And that's all Trump had to do, just diffuse the whole thing.
And then he goes, "I love when he said, and you're just a very nasty person."
A nasty woman. And the whole crowd just went, yeah.
Well, I mean, she sort of dug herself that hole. But it definitely seems like, in the film, they're trying to create this impression. What I thought would be interesting, the whole time I'm watching this movie, I'm thinking, this scenario is actually kind of plausible and believable, just from the other direction. Like this is if they would have, scripted the volunteers as like an Antifa group, for example. We've already seen them achieving, power over, like states in the West, like, Oregon and Portland.
The CHOP.
They've had, CHOP. They've been, not really held accountable. Andy just had his civil trial against a couple of individuals that he was trying to hold civilly responsible for his coordinated assaults against him. They were all sort of found not liable, even though they were basically directly involved, and evidence of their involvement was presented at trial. And the defense lawyer, claimed, the lawyer for Antifa was basically like, I am Antifa. And she also
Yeah.
said that she would remember the faces of every one of the jurors, which is why I'll be shocked if it doesn't, get overturned on appeal or something, or at least, continue into an appellate court. But this is the state of things, and it just seems to me that it's far more likely that we have a radical leftist takeover.
Yeah, exactly. But they've
and
taken the guns. They suspend elections through another virus, another emergency, and then here we are. They take the guns, and there we are. We have no way to defend ourselves.
Yeah, and instead of it being, going after gays or Muslims as they sort of portray in the film, it would be conservatives or, people who voted for a certain politician.
Or moderate, just moderate, normal people.
Yeah, anyone who hasn't sort of given their oath of allegiance to the regime,
Exactly.
and the new ideology, which is, it was a very, it was a very scary film, and the scenario is realistic. Like, we've had this idea of a military takeover, of a martial law type situation. It's just that the painting it as them being these sort of like, radical right wingers, it just doesn't really work for me, because that we don't see that. It's not a realistic thing. This is only something that exists in, the minds of these radical leftists. And also what I found really fascinating about the film was sort of, I don't know if we can get into it because it'll be a spoiler, but there's a situation towards the end where basically one of the good guys, in my opinion, becomes the thing that, they're so frightful of. He basically, like kills somebody.
Yeah.
And, in that situation,
who's begging for mercy at the time he shoots him.
Right. Who's not a threat. It's not hot blood. It's a cold-blooded murder. And he rationalizes the murder in his head, in the context of the situation. And I'm just thinking, that's exactly what the enemy, the monster in the film does. So it was kind of an interesting, in a way that they sort of show how you can become the thing that you fight against if, you lose yourself, or if you're not true to yourself. That was the other thing about that character, was that he was struggling, with his identity because he was in the closet or whatever.
Yeah.
And this was the other problem. There's too much in the movie. You have one guy in the closet. You have RJ, who we get introduced, who's like an out gay guy who's getting gay bashed, and then Sarah saves him, and they pull him in. And there's just, there's so much going on with these characters that everything just feels, it feels like there's too much happening. And at the same time, there's these lulls where nothing happens. And then, that's when I'm like, the film drags. It could have been cut.
Well, 𝗬𝗏 confronted David about that, saying that she was woman enough to self-report, yet he didn't. And he was able to essentially hide from the volunteers, just like Jarrett. I mean, Jarrett, too, was able to hide from the volunteers. And Sarah probably did, too. She wasn't anything except for not being I don't know if they were Christian or what, but they wouldn't have to report. So there you have, isn't that kind of like setting Sarah up to be the hero that she was supposed to be? Isn't that kind of like a white saviorship? Aren't they like putting forth, they're the ones that fight so hard against that. Aren't they putting forth that in this movie? Because she was the coyote that took people across the border.
Well, and it kind of goes back to something I said earlier. Why is it that it's the women in the film that do that? And again, I'm not trying to bash women in this. It's just, but more and more in film, it's like the woman is strong, the woman is the hero, the woman is everything else, which I have no problem with that if it works for the script and it works for the film. But why is it that the men, pardon my French, are made to look like pussies? I'm sorry. Why? You have two perfectly capable men who, could be just as strong, just as courageous, just as everything else as the women in this film, yet they're made to look like, they're goons and they're idiots and they're stupid and they can't do anything unless the woman tells them what to do. I
think RJ was the strongest man in the movie.
No, I'll agree with that.
He was a loner from the beginning. He had everybody against him, and in the end, he ends up being kind of a hero. So he wasn't afraid at all. I think it kind of shatters the stereotype because he plays a very, effeminate, out and proud gay man, but he was not weak at all.
No.
But all the men should have been like that. Why couldn't all the men be like that? It would have been a much better movie.
Yeah, the only male character that sort of has like that leaves a positive impression in the audience is like the gay guy.
Yeah, yeah.
Because like the rest of the men kind of just like, yeah, or they're bad guys. They're just like they're basically in the volunteers.
Exactly.
And then I think that's one of the important parts that I found like really enjoyable was that sort of Gabe, the volunteer that they have locked up, has this whole sort of like redemptive arc. And I find it really, very interesting the way that they did it, and they use the conversations as sort of a bridge to get us there. And I really just enjoyed seeing that because I felt it was like a more honest portrayal of conservatives, and in general, like men who have been portrayed like veterans and stuff. I thought it just seemed honest. And the backstory, this is one of the things I really did like about the script. All the characters had these really detailed backstories and these little, nuances with their personality that made them very believable. And as Brian said earlier, they did a really good job acting. Like I believed their performances. I felt like I was with them the entire time as they were going through this ordeal. And I really started to care about the outcome, even though I was not sure what was going to happen. And I knew a bunch of people were going to die.
Yeah.
Yeah, the scene between Gabe and 𝗬𝗏 where they're drinking beer in the barn, that to me was just remarkably well written and remarkably well performed, because despite their differences, despite their backgrounds, despite everything else about the characters, one is actually trying to reach out to the other and figure out, why are you the way you are? What made you what you are? And he finally is willing to break through the pain and the agony of his own past and reach out and say, well, this is what made me what I am today, but I am not the monster that you believe me to be. I'm not the animal that should be in these chains. And at the end, when she's unlocking the locks, part of my brain's going, girl, he's faking you out. The other part of my brain's going, okay, all right. Here we got a moment where we got people coming together. All right, we'll see where this goes.
And
yeah.
And when I was like a very, very left-leaning liberal, I always found that when I started to actually engage conservatives or moderates in discussion, that I never got angry pushback. I never got, I'm sure there's some out there who probably would have given me that. I only got peace, I had a couple that just called me a dyke and moved on. I mean, there are assholes on both sides. Don't get me wrong. But others they always engaged me in very nice conversation, very pleasant conversation. They respected what I had to say. And at the end, we just agreed to disagree. So I think it was important that they had that conversation. And also, like you said, the whole thing about, I think Gabe was a good personification of just how in turmoil American men are, or Western men right now are. And that's all races. I don't care what they are. Men have a boot, I think, on the back of their neck, and they're either a complete beta or they don't make it in this country. And I think that has really damaged this country. We need more alpha males. We need more traditional males. That should be celebrated. Traditional masculinity should be celebrated, and it's not. And that's very, very scary to me.
Yeah, now it's like non-traditional masculinity, or this is basically feminized men is what's celebrated, is what's encouraged, trying to get these kids to choose whether, their gender identity when they're in kindergarten, these, and it's a lot of female teachers that are proffering this pseudo choice, trying to get these kids to identify as something other than, cis white straight boy. I saw a funny viral video the other day, just a dad zoomed in on his 3-year-old son. He's like, your name is Trevor. You are a white Christian man. You're a white Christian boy. Your name is Trevor. And he's like, this is what I have to do every day. It was really funny. And it just it goes to show that the culture, we have this antagonism. We have this idea that white Christian men, especially the heterosexual ones, have become this monster that is armed with AR-15s and will be organized and come and get us if we're gay or Muslim or, whatever. And it's just not true. It's a lie. It's a huge lie.
I've lived in the South my entire life, except for a couple of years I lived in California. I mean, deep deep South, Alabama, Tennessee, in the sticks, and I have never had anyone be biased to me in any shape. That they always, how's your mom and them? That's all they ever say to me, and they're very respectful. If you need help, they're there for you. I love Southerners. I am a Southerner. I mean, I wouldn't want to live in any other part of the country, to be quite honest. But and I agree with you. Masculinity doesn't have to be. They put it up this toxic stereotype. There are masculine gay men. There are masculine straight men. There are masculine. It's to be a traditional masculine man has nothing to do with your sexuality. It has to do with the way you carry yourself and the way you act towards your family, I think, and the way you act towards society. And that, I think, that's what should be celebrated.
Yeah, there's a line from one of my favorite country songs, and Tracy, you probably know what it is. If you'll know the song when I say the line, "We say grace and we say man. If you ain't into that, we don't give a damn."
Don't give a damn. Yeah.
If you want the motto of Southerners, that is it. And for those who are watching this, you're wondering what the song is. Hank Williams Jr. Country Boy Can't
Survive. Right. Well, there's another line in there. Talking about where his friend gets killed. If I had I'd hang that. I'd take a piece of rope and hang a guy up and let him swing till the sun goes down.
Wish I had some beech nut, spit some beech nut in that. Shooting with an old 45. Yeah.
Yep.
And I have no idea what y'all talking about, but that's okay.
This is part of everybody being in the spot, and we all get to know each other. You come down south sometime. Trace and I'll take you around some good old fashioned country bar where they play country music straight out of a jukebox, and we will help expand your musical education.
Exactly.
Some fine music. Yes, sir.
That's the reason all the hubbub over the 𝗖ście 𝗹𝗿𝗁 song, try that in a small town. Having lived in mostly small towns in my life, that's exactly the way it is. You don't riot and burn buildings down in a small town because the common people are going to come out with guns and they're going to stop you. Yeah. Has nothing to do with your race or your gender identity. It's just if you come through here trying to cause trouble with one of our own, we're going to put a stop to it. And I don't understand all the hubbub. It's not about sundown towns. I've never lived in a sundown town, and I've lived all over the
sundown town.
It's historically, I mean, there have been those towns in history. Don't get me wrong. It's basically where the populace uses guns to keep minorities out of the seat of government, out of power, out of land ownership, sometimes even stopping them from voting. And there was a lot of that during Jim Crow. Absolutely. There was a lot of that during Jim Crow, but the South has come a long way since then.
Yeah. I mean, I live in West Virginia, and about maybe 5 miles up the road from the city in which I live is another town. I will not name what it is. And my mom and dad are old enough to remember there used to be a sign right on the city as you enter that town. It said, "N-word, don't let the sun set on you in this town." Mm-hmm. They were blatant about it. They didn't hide it. They were very blatant about it. And it was understood. If you are in this town and the sun is set and you're the wrong color of skin, you might have a problem.
Sundown town. Got it.
Yeah. I live 40 minutes from Pulaski, which is the birthplace of the Ku Klux Klan. But let me tell you, it's not that way here anymore. People just have this negative attitude about the South. We're not that way.
Well, and the irony of it is, if you go back and look at the 1950s and 60s, there were more troubles in terms of race in the North than there ever was in the South. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, I'm not trying to excuse Bull Connor and George Wallace and some really bad cats that operated in the South in the 50s and 60s. But if you go back and look at Boston, you go back and look at Detroit, there are a lot of places up north where there were huge racial problems, racial riots, racial issues. So it wasn't just confined to the South.
No, Octavia Spencer, who's one of my favorite actresses of all time, she grew up in Montgomery, Alabama. And she was given an interview to Mark Mazon's podcast, and he asked her, he said, "So tell me about growing up in Alabama. It must have been, a very racist place, blah, blah, blah." She grew up in the 80s, just like I did in Alabama. And she's like, "I never experienced racism until I moved to California." And he was just taken aback. She's like, because in the South, in Montgomery is a majority Black African American city, and people get along, and she goes, I never experienced people taking a second glance at me until I moved to California, because I moved into a nice neighborhood. Here's this single Black woman moving in next door. She said, yeah, I got a lot of racist comments. They didn't mean to, but they did. So she said, don't judge the South. She said, I'm proud to be a Southerner. And that just broke the internet when it happened.
Yeah, I believe that. But I thought the film was like definitely good at creating that creepy atmosphere where you didn't know what was going to happen next, where you're constantly feeling anxiety. And the actors did a good job of sharing that vibe with the audience through their stories. So I liked it. I thought it was cute that they sort of like they really made RJ like hard to not like, because he was very early when they're introducing him, they say that he works for like a nonprofit that helps find gay youth like housing or whatever, like homeless gay youth. I was like, oh, okay, so he worked for 𝗟𝗿𝗁𝗍. So that's like that's the nonprofit that does that in New York City. But I thought that was funny. It was a little like wink and a nod there.
He was very, very likable. His character overall, very
super likable and super cute too. That actor was so cute. He was in the OA, which I really enjoyed. He played the smart jock in that. That was the first thing I saw him in, and then I saw him in Nope. He played the techie bro that ends up helping the brother-sister duo install cameras. So he was in that as well, and he's a great actor. I can't wait to see what else he does. I thought he did a good job in this film. And go ahead.
Yeah. Other notable actors, the actor that played Gabe, he was best known for playing Renee in True Blood, very famous, Michael Raymond James. He played a serial killer in True Blood and was also very likable. So likability just oozes from his pores. And also the gentleman that played the founder, Toby Leonard Moore, he was in a couple of seasons of The Blacklist. So they did get some pretty well-known actors to kind of prop up the cast a little bit.
Yeah, they also thought that like I said, the details around the story were really good and believable. The problem so much was the plot holes that they sort of just left gaping. And the other thing, with 2 hours, you would have thought they would have had room to fill in some of that plot, but
I would like to have seen that.
Yeah. Well, they didn't, because there was too much story with the individual characters. The whole coming out sort of like thing with the one guy being in the closet, I think really sort of it was too much. It was too much for what the film was trying to do, and it was unnecessary. They didn't need that arc there to get where they were going. And then the other thing, the thing that I thought was kind of weak was the ending. And I don't want to go into too much details because it's, I don't want to spoil it for people, but at the same time, like, it was just sort of like left hanging. Basically a bunch of the characters die. I don't want to say which ones survive, but some survive, and they're sort of just like heading off to the border without really a plan or anything. And it's just, I just didn't really find that part believable so much. And then also like the whole film, they're sort of stressing this idea of not reacting emotionally, of, sticking to the plan. And then that all like flies out the window basically when things get too bad.
I mean, they're, like you said, they build tension. The volunteers come to that house several times, come to that farm several times, and in the end it all falls apart. But like you said, they're just left driving frantically for the Canadian border, and the movie just ends. And we don't know if they made it. Did they get there and the Mounties at the border said no, 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 or did they let them in?
And also, like, what was the point? Like, what, they just, I hate that. So Shakespeare was famous for having his, characters or the chorus basically sum up the whole point of the performance and directly speak it to the audience. And I feel like filmmakers really have gotten away from that. they're sort of into this more subjective frame where there's just like, well, make of it what you want, like da 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 da. They're really afraid of, you know, presenting an opinion and or a message, and then standing by that message, and then defending criticism for their message. It's like everybody just wants to be liked. They just want to present something that people will go and see, and they want to be celebrated, you know, for, you know, being like clearly they're trying to like present this sort of leftist like this whole, you know, thing of what they're presenting, this you know, post-apocalyptic dystopian future, whatever. And it will, you know, it does well in Hollywood, it plays well in Hollywood, but it's not realistic, you know, for most Americans, and again, especially for Southerners who, you know, have family that are into gun culture and hunting and know people like this that obviously wouldn't become, you know, roaming sociopathic murderers overnight.
Yeah, and I think that a perfect twist, M. Night Shyamalan twist to this would be they get to Canada and they don't let them in, or the Canadian Border Patrol shoots them for whatever reason. I think that would have been the perfect twist ending.
Well, and you both bring up a really good point. It's like this whole film, for like, let's just say 7/8 of this film, structure, we have a plan. Structure, we have a plan. We're going to stick to the plan. Structure, we're going to have a plan. And in the last 1/8 of the movie, we're all making a mad dash for the border. Well, you know, hell, if you could always make a mad dash for the border, what was the point of the 7/8 of the movie where structure, plan, structure, plan, structure, plan? Which, I, you know, in life, as with films, things can go to absolute crap. I get that. But, you know, you've just destroyed the believability of 7/8 of your movie by one 5 or 10 minute scene where we're all making the mad dash for the border. Well, if you could do it at the end of the movie, you could have done it all along. What was the whole point of the rest of it?
I think it would have been, I think in a way, maybe they were sort of poking a little bit of fun at their own side with that, because, you know, anytime something happens that a group of leftists don't like, I'm going to Canada. I'm moving to Canada. They want to move to a wider version of the United States. Let's be honest. But you never see them wanting to go to Mexico. And I think it would have been much, much better to have this maybe based in Texas or even in California, where they're having to make a dash for the Mexican border. I think that would have been a lot more. It's like the Forever Purge, you know, where, I don't know if you've seen that movie, where everything's going to shit and the Mexican and the Canadian governments open up their borders for 24 hours to let any refugees into the United States. And it's just amazing to see who tries to get to Canada and who tries to get to Mexico.
Yeah, no, it was interesting. I mean, I definitely think there was something, you know, there. I enjoyed the experience of watching the film. Probably not something I'd watch again. But, you know, as an exercise in, you know, seeing it, and I was definitely more enjoyable than I anticipated going into it. You know, I thought it was going to be a slog. I thought it was going to be really like over the head, like beating you over the head with the message. But it wasn't. The message was sort of just subtly implied. They sort of just set up the world and then let the characters run. And I thought they did a good job in doing that. But some of the stuff I just thought was a little ridiculous. There's one point where they're showing a flashback, and it's like Xavi and David, and they're like outside having like a date or whatever. And in the background, there's like a drone that just like, and then there's like another shot, and the next shot, the drone just like, and I was like, okay, I get it. Like, you're emphasizing surveillance state. Like, okay.
Yeah.
But like, it again, it was just a little too over the top.
And again, how did we get here? This happened in evidently a very short period of time, which would indicate some kind of armed revolution. And how did we get here? How did a militia group that was obviously based on groups like the Proud Boys take over the entire country?
Yeah,
how did they subvert the military? Yeah,
it just sort of implied that their leader wins office. You know, I remember at one point he was talking. There was like an advertisement that David was watching, and it was a personalized advertisement that was addressed to him. And it was just like, oh, you know, if you make like a one-time donation to my campaign, it'll wipe out your student loan debt or something. And again, that was just sort of like left there for you to make of what you will. And then it was never referenced again. You know, like I didn't get the impression that I was like, did he take advantage of that offer? Did he feel guilty about, you know, giving the guy money? You know, and I thought that could have been an interesting way to go with his character. He could have been maybe somebody in the beginning who was very supportive of the volunteers, and then as things went on, realized that he had made a mistake and regretted it. And I thought that could have been a much more interesting plot point for the character, as opposed to having this whole like gay thing, in the background, and like the thing that happened between him and his friend, and just like all this extraneous shit that I was like, we don't need this. This isn't necessary.
Instead of him being guilty about not self-reporting as a bisexual man or a gay man or whatever, have his source of guilt be that he did donate to the guy's campaign and kind of helped all this come about. That would have been a much more interesting angle.
Yeah, and also I would have liked to have found out what happened to their child, what happened to Sarah and Jared's child, that sort of like changed their perspective. Clearly they were sort of like against the stuff from the beginning, but like again, like clearly she got radicalized by the loss of her kid and she started doing the 𝗟𝗶𝗃 thing. But I would have liked, that sounded like it seems like an interesting story, like what happened there. And it again just left on the table, like, or left on the cutting room floor.
Exactly. Were they denied medical care for the child and the child died? Was the child shot by volunteers? Because we saw what happened to 𝗬𝗏's family. Her family is blown up. I understand her animosity. But what happened to them?
Yeah, and like that the fact that they sort of left that lying there kind of just like irked me.
Well, and the other thing, that going back to 𝗬𝗏 and to Sarah, I mean, talk about a contrast in two women. I mean, both of them have had tragedies in their lives. And that, here's something else they could have explored. What is it that 𝗬𝗏 had that didn't make her go over the edge, that Sarah apparently didn't? Because I mean, both of the tragedies that they experienced could have taken any two people and made them both insane at the same time. Yet one person doesn't, one person does. What's the difference? And it's never, like several other themes in this film, it's just never really explored or explained.
Yeah, well, they sort of they do mention that they don't actually talk about Sarah having any faith whatsoever. So whether she's agnostic, Christian, whatever, we don't know. But we do know that 𝗬𝗏 has faith and she's a practicing Muslim. So that could be one of the differences between the two women, is that 𝗬𝗏 has faith that carries her through the sort of hard times, and maybe Sarah's a little bit more nihilistic and just thinks she has to do what she's going to do in order to survive and protect her family.
And I thought that too, and it's interesting that they're putting that forward as a virtue that kind of kept 𝗬𝗏 sane, when religion is more of a right-wing thing, being a strong in faith. It's very interesting that they put that in there. Maybe they were trying to be open-minded, but yet the slant still ended up being over here.
Well, so 𝗬𝗏, if she's got the benefit, as far as leftists go, of being a female woman of color and a Muslim. So she's got a little trifecta of minority privilege there, which would, in my mind, it would give that character a softer treatment from the screenwriter.
And then there's that. So, absolutely. So maybe it's more of a trope than them letting a little bit of, maybe you should have faith trickle in.
Yeah, I didn't really get that message so much, but then again, like the film, really leaves the message and the interpretation up to the audience. There's no real elaboration of the theme. The closest we get to that, I think, are in the conversations that the characters have between themselves about identity and about, thinking about changing your political opinion, because what if these sacred, dearly held beliefs that you hold that allow you to rationalize violence against other people, what if they're wrong? And that maybe could be the closest thing to like the theme or message of the film.
For me, I'm an atheist. I don't lie about it, but here lately, in the last 5 or 6 years, I have found myself drifting back toward religion a little bit. I'm not saying that I believe that there's a higher power, but I'm starting to find comfort in certain scriptures and things like that. So I think there is something very beneficial in a society that has a faith. I'm not saying there should be a state religion. I do believe in separation of church and state, but I believe society and communities do better if there is an injection of religion, for a lack of a better term. I think there's certain mores that come with that, and I think if you keep it in the middle of the road, that can be very beneficial for society. Where you get in troubles when you go off on the radical side of anything is very, very bad. Let's just put it that way. But we as Americans have or people, we have a hard time with keeping it in the middle of the road. We tend to go either over here or over here, and it's neither of them are very good.
Agreed completely.
Yeah, I've heard it said that there's a God-shaped hole in the heart of man, which is kind of like to imply that if we don't have a religion, we will get religious with certain ideas, which is kind of what we're seeing with radical leftists, how they've sort of made, especially the transgender stuff, into a religion of sorts. And, they are, if they're the new, the new acolytes of this religion are like the public school teachers that are pushing it onto children. Yeah. And it's just so funny because, this is the stuff that we used to worry about from the other side. We used to worry about prayer in school and, like the overt indoctrination of Christian values and Catholic values onto kids. Like in the 80s, like there was like a satanic panic because people were playing like Dungeons and Dragons. That became popular, and all of a sudden the Christians were worried that that was actually like a satanic thing. Yeah, but it was just just make believe, whatever.
What was now? Prayer in schools. People get so offended about that. You can pray in school. You just can't be forced to pray by a school official. You can pray all you want to in school as long as it's student led. And even when I was a kid, the prayers that we said and we said the Pledge of Allegiance in the morning, and then before we went to lunch, we said, "God is great, God is good. Let us thank him for our food. By his hand we all are fed. Thank you, God, our daily bread." Very neutral prayer. It wasn't like, "Oh, I'm a Catholic." It was just, whatever.
Yeah, I was raised Catholic, and it was very, it was very mild. Like it wasn't, like that big of a deal. I transferred to public school in like the 7th grade was my first year of public school, but I was, came up Catholic 1st through 6th, and it was a fine experience. Like I don't, I was never like, beaten by a nun or anything. Like it didn't have that particular experience. The education was great.
So you didn't have the penguin wrapping you over the knuckles, like in the Blues Brothers or something.
No, they didn't use corporal punishment by the time I got there. There was no corporal punishment. You could get like reamed out by a nun, or you get like detention. But most of the kids at the school at the time, we were all very well behaved. So it was rare that there was any sort of discipline enacted.
I remember as a child, I was very asthmatic, and I was in and out of the hospital a lot. And I remember being in our local hospital. We had 2 hospitals within a 40-mile radius of my hometown. One was a Baptist affiliated hospital. One was a Catholic affiliated hospital. And one night an ambulance took me to the Catholic hospital. And I remember my mom was at work, had gone to work, going on to work, and I was laying in my room in an oxygen tent and everything. And these nuns came in and just talking to me. They were very nice, and they asked me where I went to church and blah, blah. And then this priest walked in, and he was just talking to me. They were all very nice and very cool. I mean, I was talking to my dad when he came in to see me that night about the people dressed in black and white that came in and talked to me. He got upset because they came in. They're like, "Don't try to indoctrinate my daughter." They're like, "We weren't. We just go in and try to offer comfort to all the patients. We don't care what." But I remember them being very nice. The priest read me a story. It wasn't like anything creepy.
Yeah, to go back to something you said a moment ago, as much as a conservative as I am, no, I'm not ready to declare a state religion. Okay. My thought of the matter is let Christians live in a town, let Muslims live in a town, let Jewish people live in a town, let them go to the church, the synagogue, or the mosque of their choice. Fine. When you start, and let there be natural, how do I want to say this? Natural accumulation of practitioners. Okay. Nobody's like starting religious wars in your town, to get more people in the synagogue or the church or the mosque, and everybody understands, okay, as long as you all obey the civil laws, you can worship however you want, and let that cultural influence seep into your community and make it a better place. You know,
Exactly. Even in big cities, you have the Jewish neighborhood, you have the African American neighborhood, you have the Italian neighborhood, you have the Asian neighborhood that's often split into Chinese, Korean, um, Japanese, and they all have their own culture. And then you have, people like me that is a mutt, or an atheist kind of sprinkled in with everybody. As long as you're not causing any detriment in the community, just live in your own community. People want to be with their own like people. There's nothing wrong with that at all.
yeah, yeah, I agree completely.
Yes. I'm not talking about segregation. You can free to live wherever you want. That's not, please don't take me out of context if somebody's clipping this off the internet. But people have a tendency to be tribal, and you're drawn to your own people that are like you. And we've lived that way for hundreds of years, and that's fine.
Totally. Yeah, no, I mean, and look at the gay community. We definitely self-segregate, and
Yeah.
I live in a gay community, a gay beach town. So
Yeah.
it's definitely very gay out here.
Yeah, I lived in the Castro when I lived in San Francisco. Very mostly gay men. I was one of the few lesbians that lived amongst them, but very, very gay, and it was a nice place to be.
Yeah, and Brentley, I think you nailed it. It's self-segregation. I mean, the problem starts is when a government decides, no, you're going to be separated. Wait a minute. If I choose to do that on my own, that's my own business. I'm not bothering you. You're not bothering me. I just want to go over there because my people are over there. If you want to stay over here, that's your business. But when it starts being segregation by law, that's the problem. No. If it's
One of my
choice, that's something else.
one of my dearest friends in the world, she married a Mormon and converted to LDS, and now lives in Salt Lake City in a very Mormon neighborhood. And I just happened to ask her one time. I said, "What would happen, Leslie, if my wife and I moved out and parked ourselves right in the middle of this Mormon neighborhood?" She's like, "As long as you didn't, act like a criminal and a hooligan and was respectful, they would accept you. They'd bring casseroles to your door. They'd probably invite you to church. Uh, it's just no one's gonna care." And at their core, people don't care. As long as you absorb into the culture and act like you've got some upbringing, most people don't care.
There you go.
So I don't know. Do we have any other final thoughts in the film? Like I said, I liked it, except for the fact that it was too long and unnecessarily packed with content without giving a clear theme. I think that's my overall impression.
Yeah. I'll take it from the four areas I usually cover. Cinematography, beautiful. It had to be in upstate New York, New England, someplace like that, but it was absolutely beautiful. The farm was very quaint. It was a nice little rustic farmhouse and a very nice old-fashioned barn that they shot in. Really like that. The acting, for me, Gabe, Zabi, and RJ were at the tip top. Everybody else kind of went down in quality and progression from there. Like you, I believe there was a whole lot of plot holes, and those could have been filled in by content we wanted to see instead of the content that was unnecessary, i.e., the affair, the cheating on his wife, the whole closet thing. We didn't need that to develop that character. And then to sum it up, it's a political fantasy, with definitely a left-wing slant. And like you, I believe it was a lot more liable to happen from the other side. A leftist takeover, discriminating against anybody that's not like them.
I mean, for my part, I thought it was a good film, very thought-provoking, because there's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of you can take away from this film as far as things to think about. I'm kind of like you all. There were just certain little elements that, had they been developed better, I think would have made the film overall even more enjoyable than it was. I thought the plot holes were a problem, and just like I said, other things that have plagued films now for the past 5 or 10 years, it's creeps into this thing, and it's like why do you need to do some of this? Or Brent, I think you bring up a real good point. This thing runs too long. You could have condensed this and still made it just as good a film. But I mean, overall, I thought it was a very satisfying film, very thought provoking.
Would have made a great limited series.
Yeah.
You could have cut you could have packed a whole lot more into it and cut it into 4 or 5 episodes and had a great limited series that I bet would have gotten picked up somewhere.
Absolutely.
100%. Yeah, I definitely agree. And that would have given the opportunity to more explore the backstory and specifically, the things that led to the scenario, or that, and maybe this is actually a big, not just a plot hole in the film, but actually like, a plot hole in reality, is that, what are the events that would have to occur to get us here from where we are now? Because like I said, it's much more likely we get like an Antifa derivative or something like it that becomes the national police, as opposed to some, right-wing Patriots Front style militia, which are obviously just feds anyway.
They're men that do that are a lot more concerned with their own lives than the lives of others. The only time that they get involved is when they feel they're being trampled upon. That's the only time. Whereas on the other side, they tend to want to inject themselves into your daily life no matter what you're doing. That's just my opinion.
Totally.
So,
Totally.
and I was hoping to see an actual insurrection, hence the name.
There was no insurrection, was there?
Just like January 6th. There was no insurrection.
Tracy, whatever do you mean? What are you referring to?
Yeah, overall, I give it a B, solid B.
I'd agree with that grade.
Yeah, C+. I'm a little bit less forgiving with the length, and I feel like they should have not packed that gay coming out story. This was not a gay coming out story. And that part of the story really clashes with everything else. You're trying to present this idea of a hostile thing. It would have been much better, especially like, in Aliens, one of the classic horror series that I really love, the betrayer is always a theme. So it would have been interesting, instead of having David come out, maybe if he was a betrayer, or like I said earlier, he could have been a reformed betrayer. He could have gone the other way. He could have been on the volunteer side, perhaps financially funding them or helping them get the movement off the ground, and then regretted it once he realized what he had done. And I think that would have been a much more interesting character, who would have been likable too. And really, like, because as he exists, he just kind of comes across as a big baby, and it's pathetic. It's not attractive. And then, when we ultimately see how that character story like gets lined up, it's like I was left with sort of an empty feeling, just like, oh, well, okay, that happened. How does this wrap up next? At that point, I was already
They could have had him come to that same end in a much more interesting way if it had been, I was a funder of this, I helped them get off, and now I'm regretting it. That end could have still come the same way, not because he couldn't accept the fact he was gay. I mean, I hate to use the term, this is 2023. Yes. But you don't have to stay in the closet in the West. Coming out is not a traumatic experience anymore unless you live in an uber religious family that's going to disown you.
Yeah.
And exactly. He didn't have that. He didn't have that.
Yeah.
So,
all right.
Anyway, everyone, thank you so much. Everyone, that is American Insurrection. Check it out if you have just under 2 hours that you want to kill on on any given day. And again, check out the Front Porch Conservative and Dangerous Rhetoric. And I'll see you again soon, everybody. And until next time, you don't cry.